The Forbidden Encounter. Commander David Chen had survived 3 border skirmishes, 2 diplomatic crises, and 1 catastrophic transport failure that still woke him at 0300 hours with his heart hammering against his ribs. He figured handling security on Frontier Station Epsilon would be straightforward compared to active combat zones. This assumption lasted exactly 11 days. The station floated in neutral space between Earth Alliance territory and the outer systems, a massive structure of rotating rings and docking ports that served as humanity's primary diplomatic hub. 17 different alien species maintained permanent delegations here, conducting the endless negotiations that kept the fragile peace from shattering into another interstellar war. The architecture reflected this delicate balance. Human engineering merged with alien aesthetics, creating corridors that shifted from familiar steel and polymer to crystalline structures that hummed with alien energy signatures. David's role as security liaison meant monitoring everything and everyone, ensuring that ancient grudges stayed verbal and that no one smuggled weapons into treaty negotiations. It was tedious work that required constant vigilance, which suited him perfectly. Tedious meant predictable. Predictable meant safe. Safe meant no one died on his watch. The briefing with Station Commander Williams should have been routine. David settled into the chair across from her desk, expecting another update about increased patrols during the upcoming trade summit. Instead, Williams slid a sealed file across the polished surface, her expression carved from granite. "This is classified above your current clearance," she said without preamble. "I'm authorizing temporary access because you need to understand the seriousness of this directive." David opened the file. The first page contained a single image of a woman who appeared almost human at first glance. Almost. Her skin held a silver luminescence that no human possessed, like moonlight given physical form. Delicate markings traced patterns across her visible skin, glowing faintly with soft blue light. Her eyes were larger than human standard, colored a deep violet that seemed to contain entire nebulas. Silver-white hair fell past her shoulders in waves that defied gravity's normal expectations. "Ambassador Lyra of the Etherean Collective," Williams stated. "She arrived 6 days ago for the trade summit. You are to maintain zero contact with her or any member of her delegation. No conversations, no proximity closer than 50 meters, no exceptions." David studied the photograph, noting the elegant bone structure and the way those violet eyes seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. Security threat assessment? Classified. Williams's jaw tightened. "What you need to know is that the Etherians possess abilities that Earth Command considers potentially compromising to Alliance personnel. This isn't a suggestion, Chin. This is a direct order from Admiral Okonkwo herself. You see, Ambassador Lyra, you walk the other direction. Clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am." David closed the file, filing away the image in the mental compartment where he kept all potentially dangerous variables. "May I ask why I'm receiving this specific directive?" "Station security has 47 personnel." Williams was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming against her desk in a rhythm that betrayed unusual tension. "Because your psychological profile indicates you might be particularly susceptible to Etherian influence. The details are classified, but trust me when I say avoidance is in your best interest." David wanted to press further, but Williams's expression made it clear the conversation was over. He took the file, committed the relevant details to memory, and returned to his duties with one additional parameter added to his threat assessment matrix. Maintain 50-meter exclusion zone around silver-skinned diplomat with glowing markings. The station operated on a 26-hour cycle to accommodate various species' circadian rhythms. David typically worked gamma shift, the quiet hours when most personnel were sleeping and the corridors echoed with the hum of environmental systems. He preferred it this way. Fewer people meant fewer variables, fewer chances for things to go catastrophically wrong. On his 11th night, David was conducting his routine patrol through the observation decks. These areas featured massive viewports overlooking the void, popular with personnel who needed reminders of why they endured recycled air and artificial gravity. At 0200 hours they were usually deserted. The northern observation deck offered an unobstructed view of the Helix Nebula, a swirling mass of cosmic gases that painted the darkness in shades of emerald and gold. David paused at the viewport, allowing himself 30 seconds to appreciate the view before continuing his rounds. 30 seconds to remember that despite everything, the universe remained beautiful in ways that justified the struggle to protect it. "The nebula reminds me of home," a voice said from behind him, melodic and carrying harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "Though our skies are more silver than green." David's hand moved toward his sidearm before his training overrode instinct. He turned slowly, already knowing what he would see but hoping he was wrong. Ambassador Lyra stood 15 meters away, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns glowing softly across her skin, flowing in designs that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. She wore flowing robes that appeared to be woven from starlight itself, and her violet eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Ambassador," David managed, his voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'll leave you to your contemplation." He turned toward the exit, already calculating the fastest route back to his assigned patrol sector and mentally composing the incident report he would need to file. "Commander David Chin," she said, and his feet stopped moving entirely. "Born in New Shanghai on Earth, transferred to Frontier Station Epsilon 17 days ago from the Jupiter Defense Grid. You take your coffee black with synthetic sweetener, run 15 kilometers every morning at 0600 hours, and read ancient Earth poetry before sleep because the words remind you that beauty still exists." David's blood turned to ice water. He faced her again, his hand definitely on his sidearm now, though he had no idea what good it would do against whatever allowed her to know details that weren't in any public record. "How do you know my name?" The question came out harder than he intended, carrying edges of the combat officer he'd been before Frontier Station. Lyra's expression remained serene, though something that might have been sympathy flickered in those impossible eyes. "I know considerably more than your name, Commander. I know you requested this assignment specifically because it was far from Earth, far from reminders of people you failed to save. I know you carry guilt like armor, believing if you just work hard enough, stay vigilant enough, you can prevent another Titan." The observation deck suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. "That information is classified. Sealed therapy records. How are you accessing Alliance databases?" "I'm not." Lyra took 3 steps closer, moving with a grace that suggested Etherian gravity was significantly different from Earth standard. "I don't need databases, Commander Chin. Your emotional resonance tells me everything." "My what?" David's tactical training was screaming at him to leave, to report this encounter immediately, to follow his orders. But his curiosity, the same trait that had driven him to enlist in the first place, kept his feet planted. "Etherians perceive what you might call emotional imprints," Lyra explained, her voice gentle as if speaking to a frightened creature. "Every strong emotion, every significant memory, leaves traces in the environment. Most species create faint impressions easily overlooked. But you, David Chin, you burned so brightly with determination and grief and desperate hope that I sensed your presence the moment you boarded this station." David felt his jaw tighten. "That's a violation. You're reading private thoughts, accessing memories without consent." "I'm not reading thoughts," Lyra corrected, and now her voice carried a hint of frustration. "I cannot hear your internal monologue or access specific memories. I sense the emotional weight you carry, the shape of your experiences, the resonance of your spirit. Think of it like hearing music from another room. I know the melody, the emotional tone, but not the specific words. That's why they ordered me to stay away from you." Understanding crystallized in David's mind. "Earth Command thinks you'll compromise classified information through these emotional imprints." "Partially true." Lyra moved to the viewport, gazing out at the nebula with an expression that seemed infinitely sad. "They also fear I'll help you heal from Titan, and Earth Command needs officers driven by guilt. Guilty soldiers follow orders without question, push themselves beyond reasonable limits, sacrifice everything for redemption they believe they don't deserve." The words hit harder than any physical blow. David wanted to argue, to deny the accusation, but it cut too close to truths he'd avoided examining. "You don't know anything about Titan," he said quietly. "I know you were escorting a civilian transport carrying 347 colonists to the new settlements on Titan's southern hemisphere. I know raiders attacked despite all intelligence suggesting the route was secure. I know you gave the evacuation order, did everything correctly, followed every protocol perfectly." Lyra turned to face him, and the compassion in her eyes made something crack in David's chest. "I know 192 people made it to the escape pods. 155 didn't. And I know you've counted those numbers every single day for 8 months, believing that if you'd been faster, smarter, better, you could have saved them all." David's throat constricted. "Stop. I know their names haunt you. Emily Rodriguez, Marcus Kim, Sarah Johnson, the Chin family, no relation to you, but the shared name cuts deeper." Lyra's voice remained gentle, relentless in its kindness. "I know you read the casualty list every morning at 0530 hours like a penance you've assigned yourself. I said stop. David's voice cracked on the words. Lyra fell silent, though her gaze never wavered. The observation deck's environmental systems hummed softly around them while the nebula outside swirled in indifferent beauty. Why? David finally asked. Why approach me? You could observe from distance, sense these emotional imprints without revealing yourself. Why violate my orders and yours? Lyra's luminescent markings pulsed with soft blue light, patterns shifting across her silver skin. Because in 17 days of sensing every person on this station, you're the only one whose emotional resonance shows someone still fighting to save others despite crushing guilt. Most survivors retreat into self-preservation. You're using your pain as fuel to protect people you've never met. That's rare, David Chin. That's worth knowing beyond mere emotional echoes. I'm following orders, David said, though the words felt hollow even to him. Doing my duty. You're punishing yourself, Lyra corrected gently. There's a difference. Duty serves others. Punishment serves guilt. David wanted to argue, to defend the careful structure he'd built around his grief, but her words resonated with uncomfortable truth. He'd requested Frontier Station specifically because it was far from Earth, far from anyone who knew him before Titan, far from sympathy and understanding he believed he didn't deserve. What do you want from me, Ambassador? The question emerged tired, stripped of military formality. Nothing. Lyra's smile carried sadness. I wanted you to know that someone understands the weight you carry. That your emotional resonance isn't weak or broken. It's strong enough that it echoes through this entire station, touching everyone whether they recognize it or not. Your determination to prevent another Titan inspires the security team. Your vigilance makes personnel feel safer. Your pain is not useless, David Chin. It's making a difference. Something shifted in David's chest, a hairline fracture in the armor he'd welded around his heart. They ordered me to stay away from you for my protection. They ordered you away because healing threatens their control, Lyra said. A commander who's processed his grief, who understands that perfection is impossible and that he did everything humanly possible during Titan, that commander might start questioning other orders. Might prioritize mental health over operational efficiency. Might remember that soldiers are people, not just assets. David studied her face, searching for manipulation or hidden agenda. He found only honest concern and a sadness that mirrored his own. You've lost people too. It wasn't a question. The recognition in her eyes confirmed his intuition. My entire diplomatic team, Lyra admitted softly. 3 years ago, terrorists attacked our transport during peace negotiations. I was the only survivor because I was in a different section when the explosives detonated. 43 people died instantly. I felt every emotional resonance extinguish like stars going dark. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but David meant them sincerely. So you understand why I approached you, Lyra continued. Because I know what it means to survive when others don't. I know the guilt that whispers you should have died with them. And I know that isolation only amplifies that pain. The observation deck fell quiet except for the environmental systems. Outside, the Helix Nebula continued its cosmic dance, unconcerned with the small dramas of finite beings struggling with impossible grief. I should report this encounter, David said finally. It's protocol. I know. Lyra's expression showed understanding. You'll file an incident report documenting our meeting but omitting the emotional discussion because admitting I understand your pain would require admitting you need help processing it. David almost smiled despite everything. You really can't read specific thoughts? I sense the shape of your intentions, the emotional flavor of your decisions. Close enough to be unsettling, I imagine. Lyra moved toward the exit, pausing beside him. For what it's worth, David Chin, I hope you eventually allow yourself to heal. The universe needs protectors who fight from strength, not guilt. She left without another word, her robes flowing behind her like captured starlight. David remained at the viewport, staring at the nebula while his mind raced through implications and consequences. He should report this immediately. The protocol was clear. Ambassador Lyra had initiated unauthorized contact, discussed classified information about Titan, and demonstrated abilities that could compromise Alliance security. Instead, David found himself thinking about her words. About emotional resonance and guilty soldiers and the difference between duty and punishment. He thought about the casualty list he read every morning, the names he'd memorized like a prayer to people who couldn't hear him. At 0300 hours, David returned to his quarters and filed an incident report that was technically accurate but incomplete. Brief encounter with Ambassador Lyra in Observation Deck North. Duration, 4 minutes. Subject, nebula visibility and station accommodations. No classified information discussed. No security concerns identified. The lies by omission came easily, which bothered him more than he wanted to admit. But something had shifted during that conversation, a foundation he'd built his life upon now showing cracks he couldn't ignore. David pulled up the casualty list from Titan, the names glowing on his screen in the dim quarters. Emily Rodriguez, Marcus Kim, Sarah Johnson, all 155 people he hadn't been fast enough to save. For the first time in 8 months, he wondered if reading the list every morning was honor or self-destruction. If carrying their names was duty or the punishment Lyra had identified. The question hurt worse than the familiar guilt, because it suggested there might be another way forward he'd been too broken to see. Outside his window, the Helix Nebula painted the darkness in emerald and gold, beautiful and indifferent, a reminder that the universe continued regardless of human grief. David closed the casualty list without reading it. Tomorrow he would decide whether that choice meant healing or betrayal. Tonight, he simply sat in the darkness, wondering if the woman with silver skin and violet eyes understood him better than he understood himself. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first breath after drowning. The truth revealed. David Chin didn't sleep that night. He lay in his quarters staring at the ceiling panels while his mind replayed the conversation with Ambassador Lyra in exhaustive detail. Every word, every inflection, every moment her luminescent markings had pulsed with that soft blue light. He analyzed it the way he'd been trained to analyze tactical situations, searching for manipulation tactics or hidden agendas. The problem was that everything she'd said rang true in ways that bypassed his defenses entirely. Guilty soldiers follow orders without question. The words echoed through his thoughts like a diagnostic revealing a malfunction he'd been too close to recognize. At 0530 hours his alarm chimed. David reached for his tablet automatically, fingers moving to open the casualty list from Titan before conscious thought could intervene. The file loaded. 155 names glowed on the screen in alphabetical order, each one a person who'd trusted him to keep them safe. His finger hovered over Emily Rodriguez's name. She'd been 23 years old, a botanist heading to Titan to work on the agricultural domes. He'd reviewed her file after the attack, learned details that weren't relevant to any official report but somehow mattered anyway. She'd had a younger sister on Earth, parents in Mexico City, a fiancé who'd planned to follow on the next transport. David closed the file without reading further. The guilt that usually accompanied this choice felt different today, less like a moral failing and more like self-preservation. The distinction unsettled him more than skipping the ritual entirely. He reported for duty at 0600 hours, running his standard 15-kilometer route through the station's designated exercise corridors. The familiar rhythm of feet against deck plating, controlled breathing, the burn in his muscles usually cleared his mind. Today, it gave him too much time to think about emotional resonance and whether someone across the station could sense him processing these thoughts. The idea should have felt invasive. Instead, it was strangely comforting to imagine that his struggle might be witnessed, understood without needing explanation. David reached his office at 0700 hours and immediately accessed the station's database. If he was going to violate protocol by obsessing over Ambassador Lyra, he might as well do it thoroughly. He entered his security credentials and searched for information about the Etherian Collective. The files were surprisingly sparse for a species maintaining permanent diplomatic relations with the Earth Alliance. Basic physiological data, atmospheric requirements, dietary needs, all standard diplomatic background. Nothing about special abilities or the emotional resonance Lyra had described. David expanded his search parameters, diving into scientific journals and xenopsychology studies. 2 hours later, he found a research paper buried in the archives, published 7 years ago by Dr. Sarah Okafor of the Xenobiological Institute. The title read, Preliminary Observations on Etherian Empathic Perception and Its Implications for Interspecies Communication. The abstract made his pulse quicken. Etherians possess a unique neurological structure that perceives emotional and psychological imprints left in physical spaces. This ability, termed resonance perception, allows them to sense the emotional history of environments and individuals with remarkable accuracy. Unlike telepathy, resonance perception does not access conscious thoughts but rather detects the energetic signatures of strong emotions and significant experiences. David read the entire paper 3 times, cross-referencing technical terminology and following citation trails deeper into xenopsychological research. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and deeply uncomfortable. Etherians didn't read minds. They sensed what Dr. Okafor called life resonance, the emotional and psychological traces that living beings left behind like fingerprints on reality itself. Traumatic experiences created particularly strong resonances, burning themselves into the environment in ways Etherians perceived as clearly as humans saw colors. The paper concluded with a warning that had been heavily redacted. The implications for military and intelligence applications are significant. Individuals carrying unprocessed trauma create resonance signatures that Etherians can detect from considerable distances. Recommendation: redacted, to prevent potential compromise of classified personnel and operations. David sat back, understanding crystallizing like ice forming across water. Earth Command hadn't ordered him away from Lyra to protect classified information. They'd done it because his unprocessed trauma from Titan made him a blazing beacon to Etherian perception, advertising his psychological vulnerabilities to anyone who could read resonance signatures. They'd been protecting him from someone who might actually help him heal, because healed soldiers were less controllable than broken ones carrying guilt. The realization made something cold and angry settle in David's chest. He'd trusted Earth Command, followed their orders without question, built his entire identity around duty and service. The idea that they might deliberately preserve his trauma for operational convenience felt like betrayal carved from bureaucratic necessity. His comm unit chimed with an incoming message. Commander Williams, Chin, report to my office at 1400 hours. We need to discuss your patrol logs from last night. David's stomach tightened. She'd reviewed his incident report about encountering Lyra. He had 2 hours to decide how much truth to reveal and how many lies he could justify in the name of avoiding consequences. He spent those hours trying to work, reviewing security footage and updating threat assessments for the upcoming trade summit. His mind kept drifting to Lyra's words about emotional resonance, about survivors who used pain as fuel rather than processing it properly. At 1,355 hours, David made a decision that probably qualified as career suicide. Instead of reporting to Commander Williams's office, he headed for the Eastern Wing where the Etherian delegation maintained their quarters. The corridors here had been modified to Etherian specifications. The lighting held a softer quality, more blue spectrum than the harsh white of human sections. The walls incorporated crystalline structures that hummed at frequencies just below human hearing, creating an environment that felt subtly alien and strangely peaceful. David approached the main entrance to the Etherian diplomatic suite, where 2 guards stood watch. They weren't Etherian, human security personnel assigned to protect the delegation. Both straightened when they recognized him. Commander Chin, the taller guard said, her expression carefully neutral. This area is restricted to authorized personnel only. I need to speak with Ambassador Lyra, David stated, keeping his voice calm and professional. It's regarding station security matters. The guards exchanged glances. Sir, our orders specify that you're not cleared for contact with the Etherian delegation. We'll need to verify this request with Commander Williams. That won't be necessary, a melodic voice said from behind the guards. Lyra emerged from the diplomatic suite, her silver skin luminescent in the blue-tinted lighting, violet eyes fixed on David with an expression that might have been satisfaction. Commander Chin is expected. Please allow him entry. The guards looked uncertain but stepped aside. David had approximately 30 seconds before they reported this encounter to Williams, effectively ending any plausible deniability he might claim. He stepped into the diplomatic suite without hesitation. The interior was breathtaking. The walls weren't walls in the traditional sense but rather flowing surfaces of crystalline material that shifted colors in response to movement and sound. Soft blue light emanated from fixtures that seemed grown rather than constructed. The air held a faint scent like ozone after rain, clean and charged with possibility. Lyra gestured toward a seating area where furniture adapted to the occupant's physiology. I sensed you coming 15 minutes ago. Your emotional resonance was conflicted, determined, and carrying edges of something I'd interpret as righteous anger. Research went well, I assume? David remained standing, hands clasped behind his back in military rest position. You knew Earth Command was using my trauma to keep me compliant. It wasn't a question. Lyra's expression confirmed it anyway. I suspected, she admitted, settling gracefully onto a seat that molded itself to her form. The pattern is common enough. Identify personnel with unprocessed trauma, maintain them in positions of high responsibility, ensure they channel guilt into excessive dedication. It's efficient from a command perspective, utterly cruel from a psychological one. Why didn't you say so last night? David demanded, the anger he'd been suppressing bleeding into his voice. Why talk around it instead of just telling me I was being manipulated? Because you wouldn't have believed me, Lyra said simply. You needed to discover it yourself, to feel that moment of understanding when the pieces aligned. If I'd simply accused Earth Command of manipulating you, your loyalty would have overridden your logic. You'd have dismissed me as an alien attempting to undermine Alliance authority. David wanted to argue but couldn't. She was right. If she'd made that accusation during their first conversation, he would have reported it as an influence operation and doubled down on avoiding her. I read Dr. Okafor's paper, he said instead, about resonance perception. You can sense emotional imprints left in physical spaces, strong enough that my trauma essentially broadcasts my psychological state to anyone with your abilities. A crude but essentially accurate summary. Lyra's markings pulsed with soft light. Though you're more than trauma, David Chin. Your resonance also carries determination, compassion, and a fierce protective instinct toward people you've never met. Those qualities shine just as brightly as your guilt. David finally moved from his rigid stance, pacing across the crystalline floor. The paper was heavily redacted. What was Earth Command worried about? What can you actually perceive that they consider dangerous? Lyra was quiet for a moment, her violet eyes tracking his movement. We can sense deception, David. Not the specific lies people tell, but the emotional dissonance when someone's words contradict their true feelings. We can identify individuals carrying secrets that cause them psychological distress. We can recognize when orders conflict with someone's moral compass, when authority demands actions that violate personal ethics. Understanding hit David like cold water. You make it impossible to hide internal dissent. A soldier might follow orders perfectly while their resonance screams that they believe those orders are wrong. You'd sense that conflict. Exactly. Lyra's voice carried sadness. We're dangerous to command structures built on unquestioning obedience because we reveal the psychological cost of that obedience. We show when loyalty conflicts with conscience, when duty demands sacrifice of personal values. David stopped pacing. Is that why the terrorists attacked your delegation 3 years ago? Because you threatened someone's command structure? Pain flickered across Lyra's features, her luminescent markings dimming slightly. The investigation concluded it was extremists opposed to Etherian-human cooperation. But yes, I've always suspected there were elements within various governments who saw our abilities as threats rather than assets. 43 people died to silence questions about what our resonance perception might reveal. The weight of shared loss settled between them. David moved to the seating area, finally sitting across from Lyra. You said you were the only survivor because you were in a different section. That you felt every resonance extinguish. Like stars going dark across a night sky, Lyra confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. Etherians perceive each other's resonance particularly clearly. I felt my colleagues die, experienced the moment their emotional signatures ceased. The silence that followed was worse than any physical pain. How did you survive it? David asked. The guilt, the questions about why you lived when they didn't? Lyra's smile was sad and knowing. I didn't, not for a long time. I retreated into isolation, convinced my survival was cosmic injustice. I stopped sleeping properly, started reading the casualty list every morning, and poured myself into work with obsessive intensity to avoid processing the loss. David felt his throat constrict. That sounds familiar. I know. Your resonance carries the same patterns mine did 3 years ago. Lyra leaned forward, her violet eyes intense. It took another Etherian, an elder named Kale, to help me understand something crucial. Survival isn't a crime that requires punishment. The fact that we lived doesn't diminish those who died. It simply means we carry responsibility to honor their memory through how we choose to live. How do you honor 43 dead diplomats? David asked quietly. By continuing the work they believed in. By building the bridges between species that they died trying to construct. By refusing to let their deaths justify isolation or bitterness. Lyra's markings brightened. And by helping others who carry similar burdens, showing them that healing doesn't mean forgetting. David sat with those words, feeling them settle against defenses he'd maintained for 8 months. You approached me because you recognized yourself in my resonance. I approached you because I saw someone strong enough to survive but too wounded to recognize his own strength, Lyra corrected. Because I know what happens when people like us isolate ourselves with our guilt. We become efficient, dedicated, and slowly hollow ourselves out until nothing remains but duty and regret. Earth Command prefers us that way, David said, the anger returning but colder now, more controlled. Many command structures do. It's not unique to humans. Lyra stood, moving to a viewport that overlooked the Helix Nebula. But you're here now, David Chin. You violated direct orders to find me. Your resonance shows determination to understand truth regardless of consequences. So I'll ask directly, what do you want? David considered the question seriously. What did he want? 24 hours ago, he would have said to do his duty, protect the station, maintain security protocols. Now those answers felt incomplete, like describing a three-dimensional object using only 2 dimensions. I want to stop reading the casualty list every morning, he admitted. I want to sleep without seeing Emily Rodriguez's face. I want to remember the 192 people I saved instead of obsessing over the 155 I lost. I want to feel like I'm living instead of just serving penance for being alive. Those are achievable goals, Lyra said gently. Etherian resonance therapy could help you process the trauma, reorganize the emotional imprints so they inform your experience without dominating it. But Earth Command has banned such therapy for Alliance personnel, claiming it could compromise operational security. Because healed soldiers ask questions, David said bitterly. And possibly because genuine healing creates resonance signatures that reveal the therapy occurred, advertising that Alliance personnel are receiving Etherian assistance. Lyra turned from the viewport. Which brings us to the central question. Are you willing to accept help that violates your orders? David's comm unit chimed urgently. Commander Williams, demanding his immediate presence in her office with increasing hostility in each subsequent message. He had minutes, maybe less, before security came looking for him. If I accept, he said slowly, I'm effectively ending my career with the Alliance. Williams will have evidence I deliberately violated orders, engaged with someone I was explicitly told to avoid, and potentially compromised operational security. All true, Lyra confirmed. Though I should mention that my delegation has been negotiating with Earth Alliance about establishing formal cooperation protocols. If you were to request assignment to that program, it would provide diplomatic cover for our interactions. That program doesn't exist yet. It will by tomorrow morning, Lyra said with quiet confidence. My government has been waiting for the right human advocate, someone who understands both the value and the risks of Etherian cooperation. Someone whose resonance shows genuine dedication to protecting others rather than advancing political agendas. David stared at her. You're offering me a way forward that involves completely restructuring my career and my life. I'm offering you a choice, Lyra corrected. Continue as you have been, reading casualty lists and slowly destroying yourself in the name of duty. Or accept help, risk consequences, and potentially build something new from the wreckage of Titan. His comm unit chimed again. Security was definitely coming. David made his decision. All right, he said. I'm in. But if we're going to do this, we do it properly. No hiding, no deception. I tell Williams exactly what I'm doing and why. Lyra's markings pulsed with what he was learning to recognize as approval. That will be difficult. Good. I'm tired of easy choices that slowly kill me. David stood, squaring his shoulders. But first, I need to know something. This cooperation program, these protocols your government wants to establish. What's the real goal? To prevent more incidents like Titan and like the attack on my delegation, Lyra said seriously. Human tactical expertise combined with Etherian resonance perception could identify threats before they materialize. We could sense when individuals are under duress, when coercion is occurring, when violent intentions are forming. We could save lives, David. Lots of lives. By revealing people's internal conflicts and secret doubts. By understanding when external pressures are creating dangerous situations. There's a difference between invading privacy and recognizing warning signs. Lyra moved closer, her voice earnest. I won't claim the program is without ethical complications. Resonance perception raises profound questions about consent and privacy. But used responsibly with proper oversight, it could prevent tragedies. David's comm unit now showed an emergency priority message. Security team en route to Etherian diplomatic suite. Commander Williams personally leading them. She's coming, David said. With backup. I know. I can sense her resonance from 3 corridors away. She's angry, worried, and determined to extract you from what she perceives as a dangerous situation. Lyra smiled slightly. This is your last chance to walk away, claim I manipulated you, maintain your current trajectory. David thought about the casualty list he hadn't read that morning. About Emily Rodriguez and Marcus Kim and 153 others whose names he'd memorized like prayers to the dead. He thought about Lyra's 43 dead diplomats and the silence when their resonances extinguished. He thought about the difference between duty and punishment, between honoring the dead and being haunted by them. No, he said firmly. I'm done walking away. The diplomatic suite's entrance opened. Commander Williams strode in with 4 security personnel, her expression carved from professional fury. She took in the scene, David standing calmly beside Lyra, no signs of distress or coercion, and her jaw tightened. Commander Chin, Williams said, her voice controlled steel. You were ordered to avoid contact with Ambassador Lyra. You ignored 3 direct communications and entered a restricted area without authorization. Explain yourself. David met her gaze steadily. I'm formally requesting transfer to the Etherian Human Cooperation Protocol Program, effective immediately. I believe my experience and Ambassador Lyra's capabilities could create significant value for Alliance security operations. That program doesn't exist, Williams snapped. It will, Lyra interjected smoothly. My government is prepared to formalize the proposal this evening. Commander Chen would be an ideal human liaison, given his tactical background and his understanding of the psychological aspects of security work. Williams turned her glare on Lyra. You manipulated him. Used your abilities to compromise an Alliance officer. I offered him a choice, Lyra corrected calmly. He made it freely, knowing the consequences. His resonance shows clarity of purpose, not coercion. Your resonance readings aren't admissible as evidence, Williams said. Perhaps not. But they're useful for understanding motivation. Lyra's violet eyes held sympathy. Commander Williams, your resonance shows genuine concern for David's well-being alongside anger about protocol violations. You believe you're protecting him from manipulation. I respect that. But he doesn't need protection. He needs support processing legitimate trauma that's degrading his effectiveness and his quality of life. Williams's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. This is irregular. Completely against established procedures. Established procedures are slowly killing him, Lyra said bluntly. His guilt over Titan is being weaponized to maintain compliance. That's not duty. That's abuse disguised as military necessity. The words hung in the air between them. Williams looked at David, searching his face for something. Is this what you want, Chin? Genuinely? David nodded. Yes, ma'am. I'm tired of carrying Titan alone. If Etherian therapy can help me process what happened, if this cooperation program can prevent similar incidents, then violating protocol seems like a reasonable trade. Williams was quiet for a long moment. The security team waited, uncertain whether they were witnessing an intervention or an international incident. All right, Williams finally said. But this goes through official channels. Full documentation, proper authorization from Alliance Command, oversight protocols. If we're doing this, we do it correctly. Relief flooded through David. Understood, ma'am. And Chin? Williams's expression softened fractionally. The casualty list. You should stop reading it every morning. Those people wouldn't want you destroying yourself on their behalf. David felt his throat tighten. You knew about that? I review all personnel psychological profiles. Yours showed classic survivor guilt patterns. Williams glanced at Lyra. Maybe she's right. Maybe we have been using your trauma instead of addressing it. Consider this my apology for that failure. Williams turned to leave, pausing at the entrance. The cooperation program proposal better be extraordinary, Ambassador. Because I'm risking my career vouching for this insanity. It will be, Lyra promised. Thank you, Commander. The security team filed out, leaving David and Lyra alone in the crystalline suite. The Helix Nebula swirled outside the viewport in emerald and gold, indifferent and eternal. Well, David said after a moment. That went better than expected. Your commander's resonance shows someone who prioritizes people over protocols when forced to choose, Lyra observed. She was always going to support you once she understood your genuine motivations. David moved to the viewport, looking out at the nebula. What happens now? Now we formalize the cooperation program. We establish protocols for resonance therapy that respect privacy while addressing trauma. We prove that humans and Etherians can work together in ways that honor both species' strengths. Lyra joined him at the viewport. And you begin healing from Titan, not by forgetting but by integrating those experiences into a larger understanding of yourself. No more casualty lists? No more using them as punishment. You can remember Emily Rodriguez and the others without believing their deaths were your fault. Lyra's markings pulsed softly. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, David. It means carrying memory without letting it crush you. David nodded slowly, feeling something tight in his chest beginning to loosen. For 8 months, he defined himself by Titan's casualties, believing that guilt was the only appropriate response to survival. The idea that he could honor the dead without destroying himself seemed almost revolutionary. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for approaching me. For refusing to let me hide." "Thank you for being brave enough to accept help," Lyra replied. "That takes more courage than following orders ever could." Outside, the Helix Nebula continued its cosmic dance. Inside the diplomatic suite, 2 survivors stood together, no longer alone with their grief, beginning the difficult work of transforming trauma into purpose and guilt into meaningful action. The station systems hummed around them, processing air and maintaining gravity and keeping thousands of beings alive in the hostile void of space. David understood then that this was humanity's real strength. Not weapons or tactics or military precision, but the stubborn refusal to let darkness have the final word. They had been ordered to stay apart. Instead, they chose to stand together. And in that choice, something new became possible. The conversation that followed lasted hours. Lyra explained resonance therapy in detail, how it would help David reorganize the emotional imprints from Titan without erasing the memories themselves. They discussed the cooperation program's framework, how human tactical analysis combined with Etherian resonance perception could identify threats before they escalated. David talked about the people he'd saved, allowing himself to acknowledge the 192 who'd survived because of his actions. For the first time in 8 months, he let their faces matter as much as those who'd died. When he finally returned to his quarters at 0300 hours, exhausted but oddly peaceful, David pulled up the casualty list one final time. He read through all 155 names, acknowledging each person not as evidence of his failure but as individuals who deserved better than the universe gave them. Then he archived the file. Not deleted because forgetting would dishonor their memory. Archived because daily punishment wasn't the same as genuine remembrance. David lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling panels, and realized he was looking forward to tomorrow. Not with dread or guilt or the grinding obligation of duty, but with genuine curiosity about what might be built from the wreckage of the past. Outside his window, the Helix Nebula painted the darkness in emerald and gold. Beautiful, indifferent, eternal. A reminder that the universe continued regardless of human grief, but also that beauty persisted even in the void. For the first time since Titan, David Chin slept without nightmares. And when he woke, he didn't reach for the casualty list. He reached for possibility instead.